You're listening to 89.1 FM WNYU.
Against the vile grain!
You just listened to Chimera Pyre off the album Minotaur, out now on cassette via Strange Boys Records.
You're listening to WNYU 89.1 FM, Against the Vile Grain. I have here on the show with me a very special guest, Thomas Botner of Straight Panic, Fire Island, Alaska, and Secret Historian. Thomas makes angry, grating, queer power electronics which inspires wrath, frustration, and bitterness, which I ultimately find to be inspiring and empowering. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
Sweet, let's dive right into it. I feel like the queer experience has its euphorias and devastations, and therefore power electronics is an ideal representation for it. How does Straight Panic represent queer liberation, and in which ways do you find it cathartic for the devastation?
Well, initially and baseline, Straight Panic has always been a way to express the frustrations that come from living in a predominantly heteronormative society. And of course, I could get all political science and go into the tie-ins with capitalism and classism, but blah, blah, blah. Straight Panic is baseline about frustrations of dealing in a society that majority does not represent you as an individual. As far as the devastations, that's, kind of a personal pet project that's going on in my own life, with realizing how much of queer history is not represented. And I'm not even talking about, history books. Events like the Upstairs Lounge fire in New Orleans, which was an arson attack, that happened in the 60s. People don't really know about that. It's gotten better coverage these days because there's a documentary and there's a Skylar Fain art retrospective in New Orleans at the Museum of Art. But it's drawing attention to these traumatic events in the past that get glossed over. And it's a way, at least for me personally, to kind of keep pushing the narrative that, gay marriage got passed, but that doesn't mean everything's cool now. The logo channels on satellite TV, but that doesn't mean everything's cool now. And it's just kind of a way to keep what I view are important issues related to experience and sanity at the forefront of kind of a cultural dialogue.
Nice. Yeah, that was very well put.
We've been reading a lot about a new disease that people are frightened about, and it gets in the bloodstream through transfusion. There's no pollution in the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's pure. It'll cleanse from every sin, no matter what it is.
You just listened to Gift Giver off the album God is the Giver of the Gift, which came out last year via No Rent Records.
Nice. Yeah, that was very well put. Thank you. Your music, when you're discussing all those themes about devastation and queer history, you know, these forgotten events, it can make people uncomfortable. I mean, about the topic, but also the textures that you make, the samples that you use, and the lyrics that you have. For whatever reason, I mean, this is something many people, myself included, seek to experience when listening to power electronics. Do you find this discomfort to be empowering?
I do. I mean, I think it's a lot of the same reason that, you know, people listen to metal, people listen to techno, like music with a really high BPM and a driving rate. It gets the blood going. It gets people feeling energized. And a lot of times I think you can argue that subject matter and topicality is kind of secondary to that. Like, nice ambient music or stuff to just throw on in the background, it's good for its time and place and what you're looking for. But specifically with music like noise and power electronics and even early punk, anything that's very thematically driven, especially with regards to political issues, I think people really do seek out stuff that is more grating and aggressive because it requires more attention, and that attention drives thought, and that thought drives introspection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. A classic like power electronics tactic is to sample the atrocious and layer grating, nasty electronics and screams over it to subvert its meaning. One of my favorite samples is off the track Boys Academy off the album Religious Liberty Task Force, in which a man yells about how parents need to rip off their sons' dresses and force them to dig ditches because, quote, that's what boys do. Can you tell me why you choose to sample the things you do and where you go to find them?
I know this will probably lose me some cred points in the scene, but I pretty much farm all my samples off YouTube because it's free and it's accessible. You know, I can get it on my cell phone. But yeah, stuff like that, that's Pastor Steven Anderson out of Arizona. In certain circles, he's highly notorious, and he is a contemporary figure. Like, you know, this is not a guy from the 50s or 60s. Like, this is a guy that's still got his small church and is on Fox News nowadays, and I use a lot of the samples I use, and I know to the untrained eye and people that aren't familiar with power electronics that it does just come off as, what's the word, gawkerish. It's indulgent, but it's a way to highlight what I feel are absurd claims. Like, you know, your son likes to wear a dress, so rip the dress off and make him go dig ditches, because that's what boys do. Like, that's, on its face, that's such a completely ludicrous statement. Like, it's 2020. Who still digs ditches by hand? We have heavy machinery. Like, come on. It's just such an absurd line of thought, and that's one thing I try to really get in my samples. I know a lot of times I am guilty of indulging the slightly more edgy aspects of my sense of humor, but, you know, these really outlandish samples that you hear in power electronics and in my own work, admittedly, they're chosen and used to highlight an absurdity of thought. Like, this staunch black and white dichotomy that people have about notions of, like, gender or the economy or politics, like, it's all so ridiculous. We have, like, 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. I also like, you know, you said you might like lose cred for using YouTube, but you know that there's something about that, the fact that anyone can go on YouTube and just find that fucking absurdity, you know, that these garbage ideologies just so easily. You know, I think that so speaks to the power of like what you're sampling.
The main drawback is that it's hard to find what you want, especially when you've seen something in the past and you remember it, but you can't remember where you saw it. There's just, that's a longer discussion for later, just about like music in the 21st century. But the internet has been great and it has been terrible all at the same time.
Right. So, yeah, why embrace the perspectives of evil or the sinister or the vile as you do in some tracks like Fatherland or Big Man?
Well, it's funny that you picked those two, because Fatherland was just me reacting to the whole Trump base and this mass vitriol that we've put on display in America right now. And Big Man was just me reacting to how much I hated my job of being a security guard at a bar in New Orleans. But at base level, you can boil it all down to just people behaving badly in public. Yeah, it's like I said, there's a very thin line that you have to tread when you use these samples and put them out there that you don't want to come across as glorifying. Like, holding these images up to the public eye to enact greater scrutiny and discussion is what I think it's a very important part of the conversation, but there is a nuance to it that you have to be careful with, because otherwise it does just come off as gratuitous.
Right. That's a problem I have with a lot of, like, earlier power electronics, especially. Like, I love Genocide Organ, but I think that line that they ride is dangerous just because it often ends up looking like they're glorifying what they might be trying to critique.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, full disclosure, I love Genocide Organ, and I know what those guys are about, but I'm also someone who's been listening to power electronics for like a decade and reading about it and seeking it out and studying it on my own. Like, to the untrained eye, yes, a lot of this stuff does just look really suspect. But, you know, I mean, the argument's been made that that's kind of the purpose of quote-unquote good art. I mean, that's always been the problem with punk rock. Like, I love Crass to this day, but Crass did kind of have that ambiguity in a lot of their stuff. Like, it's too easy to just get up and say, I hate this sucks, it's bad. Like, that's boring.
Right.
Like, you want to, well, I shouldn't say you, I want to bring my listeners in to a conversation and force them to examine things and think about things. Like, I don't want disciples, I want conversations.
Yeah, that's what I love power electronics for, is that I think it's a really great conversation starter for a lot of different topics. There's a lot to talk about like the philosophy of the sounds too, and you know how those enrich like the topics that you're trying to address and stuff. But another track that I really love where you embrace a perspective, which is sinister, is off one of my favorite albums of yours, which is God is the Giver of the Gift, which is an album surrounding the overblown theory that gay men intentionally infected others with AIDS on a mass scale. In the track Gift Giver, you take on the perspective of one of these false men and rope his angry power trip with religious language, you know, like AIDS being a scourge God put on the world as a response to carnal homosexual sin. This is an obscure bit of queer history rarely discussed despite its prevalence in popular evangelical discourse from the time. Much of your work revolves around history. For example, you're split with Dos Litalis, which is about the origins of the prison industrial complex. Can you tell me how history informs or motivates your music?
Well, there's that old quote, and I can't remember who it's attributed to anymore, but the personal is political. And I believe that because for every political issue, and it's easy to forget this nowadays with quote-unquote mass media and talking heads, but every political issue, there is someone at the base of that issue that is being personally affected by that. Like, you can't say that anything, especially these days, is not political. And that's why I look a lot to the history, because all these historical issues, these historical discussions and events, at the very base bedrock layer of each of these, there have been actual human beings that have been profoundly affected by these issues. Like, it's too easy to say, oh, it's politics, I don't follow politics, but people need to realize that political issues directly influence people's lives. It may not be your life, it may not even be someone you know's life, but somewhere out there, this issue is basically determining whether or not a person lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any parts of history you'd like to reflect upon in your music in the future?
I mean, yes, but I have nothing on deck at the moment. You know, like, specifically God is the Giver of the Gift, that was honestly a lucky strike of inspiration on my end. Like, I was looking for samples, and I ran across that Billy Graham speech, and he said that, and something clicked in my head where I was like, oh, the gift giving, bug chasing, oh, and it just all kind of snowballed out of that. But that was just right time, right place, and I was in the right frame of mind. I'm sure I'll come up with something soon. I can get back to you and give you a more specific answer, but yeah, I don't know. I read a lot, so I'm always digesting information and looking for new inspirations.
Just letting something strike is good, though. Yeah, just like wait till that motivation, till the right thing hits you. That's good. Did an interest in history inspire the name of your project, Secret Historian?
That one's kind of hard to say because that's such a new one for me. Like, Secret Historian is just me trying to do straight up harsh noise, which is not necessarily a style I've toyed around with a lot in my life, but I like the idea. I guess I should say the concept behind Secret Historian is kind of a mixture of like alternate histories, which I know gets to sound all woo-woo and crunchy, but this notion of the past informing the future, but in how much does the future inform our understanding of the past, which is just a really obtuse way of rephrasing the term revisionist history. Like, how much do we really know about the past, considering, as they say, history is written by the winners?
Right. Yeah, I mean, people like to treat history as if it's this very objective thing. And it's not, like every sort of history that you tell is eventually has some sort of bias, has some sort of direction that you're leading people in, I feel. And unfortunately, people, I think, if they learn that, they might not take history as seriously as they should. It's like, just because something is not objective doesn't mean it's not incredibly important,
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you kind of see that today with the whole political spectrum in America, at least. People have gotten to this point where they're like, oh, well, history's all objective, and it depends who's telling it to you, and I don't believe anyone because everyone's got bias, so nothing matters. And, like, on an aesthetic level, nihilism can be attractive, but that's really, really a bad way to operate society. And when I say society, I just mean the very basic concept that a bunch of people are going to live close together and try to get along.
Yeah. Speaking on, like, the politics of power electronics, like, power electronics is often associated with vague far-right politics, senseless transgression, in-your-face machismo. Do you feel your music fights against this stereotype?
It's a struggle. I try to. There are many classic power electronics acts that I love deeply for various reasons that obviously have influenced my work. I try to push against that, and it's difficult, especially for Straight Panic as a project, to push a very queer narrative, but also not fall into trappings of, like, masculine strength and machismo. And, it's one of the things with the genre, like, how do you convey notions of struggle and fight and brutality without buying into these westernized concepts of, like, manhood? Like, violence in the West is a very masculine concept. So it's hard. It's hard to maintain those nuances. And I think as an artist, the best I can do is be aware of them and be conscious of them. But yeah, I mean, power electronics, for a long time it has been a boys' club. In a lot of ways it still is, but contemporarily right now, you see a lot of female artists coming up. You see lots and lots of incredibly talented POC artists. You see a huge blossoming of trans and non-binary artists, which I love. And some of those kids are just blowing my mind lately. Like, their output and their quality is just off the chart. And I love it. And good. I think that's one of the good things of the internet. Like, suddenly now these kids that live in small towns that are into weird stuff can find these influences and be like, oh, this is what I'm into. I finally found it somewhere. it's far cry from when I was like 16.
Oh, I love the blossoming and like young queer artists in power electronics that's happening right now. I try to make that like the focus of my show. It's really wonderful. That being said, like what do you think the role of queer people in the noise scene is right now?
I mean, it's hard. I understand the question. I think my weird brain is just tripping up over the wording. I mean, I'm not sure if anybody really has a role within it, but for the up-and-coming class of queer noise artists, it's carving out space and establishing a legitimacy, which I wholeheartedly think they've done. A+, everybody. Like, the content of work, and especially this year, like, all of us being locked inside and overrun with anxiety has been just great for the American noise scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't financially keep up with everything that's coming out lately.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'd say right now we're seeing kind of this renaissance in American noise again, similar to like the mid 90s and the early 2000s when like American Tapes was really rolling, when Hospital Productions was just doing a bang up job of dropping fire like every week.
Mm-hmm.
We're really seeing this great kind of recentering and reestablishment of American noise culture. And I think definitely you'd be hard pressed to say that this new class of queer noise artists that's coming up and making a name for themselves cannot be credited with that, because a lot of these young kids, man, they make me feel old. Like, I remember when I had the energy to like self-release 8 tapes in a month.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good. It keeps us on our toes. Makes me want to keep working, even with these limited outlets we all have in the plague times.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Have you found like the noise scene to be a welcoming place?
You know, I really have, honestly. Like, I don't know if it's because we just all are into the same stuff and we get it, and it's a way for us to just pal around and like, yeah, did you hear this record? Oh yeah, well, did you hear this tape? Or if it's something more profound that, you know, noise attracts certain kind of personalities.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like in my life, I've never really run into much pushback from within the noise scene. I mean, sure, there's idiots and jackasses everywhere, but I certainly can't say I've had too many issues. Honestly, the most pushback I've ever had has been dealing with like sound guys and bar owners who don't know what they're booking.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely like played shows and had sound guys complain to me that the night before a bunch of noise musicians came in and wanted to direct them around, but they don't get it, you know?
Yeah, right? Like, we've all got those stories, you know. You show up with your stuff and your mixer, and somebody's like, well, wait, you have a mixer, what do you want? I'm like, I'm going to give you these 2 cables, you just make sure I don't blow anything. Like, well,
Right.
What? No, dude, just like, it's cool, just I don't know. I mean, I do noise, so of course I understand what's going on, but I feel like most sound guys should be thrilled to have a noise show, because all they've got to do is make sure the volume doesn't blow the in-house setup. Like, that should be the easiest night of work for you ever.
Right.
Why are you making this so much harder?
Right.
You're not running, like, 12 mic lines out and miking up an entire drum set. Like, come on, dude. You're getting 1 or 2 cables, and you just have to control the main volume.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's funny. We all joke about it. Well, at least I should say in my immediate circle of friends. But noise fests are like family reunions.
Mm.
And it's rough this year. Like, I mean, granted, I was living in New Orleans. I worked way too much at a bad job, didn't have any opportunities to play. So noise shows were like the thing I looked forward to each year. Mm-hmm. Get out of town for a few days, see as many of my friends as possible in a short amount of time. And it was great. And not having that opportunity right now is rough. I miss my homies.
Yeah.
I miss my noise fam.
Yeah.
You just listened to Isolation by Isolation of the album Pandemic, which came out earlier this played by Deathbed Tapes.
Yeah, you talked about if maybe there's like a certain sort of personality type or people that are drawn to making noise. In the article Homocore Rules by Dennis Cooper, who I know is a big influence on you, he argues he argues that there was a split between certain gay people and the gays of homocore, aka those who share a, quote, hatred for political correctness, yuppification, and all things bourgeois, especially within the gay community. Do you feel like this schism still exists?
Absolutely. I mean, it does in everything. There's always that argument about the politics of respectability. But definitely today, especially, it's very easy to just look around and say, yes, capitalism is not really doing a great job for most people. And then you have these major advocacy NGO groups like Human Rights Campaign. And it is just this whole notion that if you sit down and you're polite and you look quote unquote normal and, we just want to be able to go to work and have a house and just be good tax-paying citizens like everybody else. Like, no, like that system has not been working. It's currently not working, and I think the more apt term would be to say it's currently failing. Like the whole notion of politics of respectability is, in my mind, it's based on assimilation and capitulation, and it's unrealistic. Like, yes, there's a certain amount of concession that living in modern society requires of people, but that doesn't mean that people have to assimilate themselves into these little gross cookie cutters.
Right. Much of Cooper's writing exposes like a dark underbelly of violence and degeneracy which exists in the queer community. Like, whether said violence or degeneracy is morally bankrupt is up to the spectator, I suppose. But do you find that the noise scene to be a hub of homocore, a place where victims or perpetrators of said violence exist?
Yes. Especially victims. I think, with any kind of aggressive / transgressive art forms, it is a way for people to work through trauma and to air grievances and to examine personal types of trauma. Yeah, I think it's partly tied to the nature of the art form itself and also to the topics that it has established as being acceptable to address, that people, they find it's a more apt way of expressing these sort of uncomfortable truths in their lives. The other side, you mentioned perpetrators of said violence. Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't say whether the noise scene is actually sketchier than the metal scene or the punk scene or the pop punk scene or anything. It's not perfect. There's bad people. But I mean, there's bad people everywhere, and all we can do as conscientious human beings is, I don't know. My first instinct is to say drum them out, but I believe in accountability, and censorship has proven not to be functional in that regard. But that's a much larger discussion for another time, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I also mean by, violence, yeah, of course, I also mean that, there's this other Dennis Cooper article where he's talking about Derek Jarman, and he's talking about how, the Gay-Straight Alliance in the 90s, they didn't like this early wave of gay filmmakers like Gus Van Sant or, Greg Araki, because they often depicted gay people's, fucked up lives, They depicted people with drug addictions and that were, had violence in their relationships. I don't know. I think to a degree, everybody's capable of certain amounts of violence, and I feel like we all have to be willing to recognize that. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned that, and it reminds me of this article. I wish I could remember what year it came out. It was by Michael Swift in Gay Community News, and it was this manifesto, and it came with kind of a header right underneath the byline that explained how it was basically a rage fantasy, and it was an expression of pain and of grief and of trying to like rebalance the scales for what at that time felt like a very powerless segment of humanity. And it starts off, you know, we will sodomize your sons, we will seduce them in your houses of worship, in your locker rooms, and it goes on like that. And
Nice.
It's this very painful and emotive expression of trying to reclaim power that's been stripped away from people and turning the tables of violence that's been visited upon them. But of course, you know, the Republican Party, they took off that header and then they just read it in Congress. And they made it out to be like, this is the gay agenda. We got their meeting minutes. Like, this is what they want to do, everybody. And it's, I mean, one, it's such a cheap, heavy-handed way of going about it, especially since the thing's in the congressional record. But yeah, like that whole notion of people working through trauma and anger in a creative outlet and then just completely removing the disclaimer at the top. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I'm not surprised though that they did that. You know, of course they would. They still do stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it's just such a blatant ripoff though, and it's always surprised me that they even got away with it. But again, you know, that was the 90s, and we didn't really have the internet back then, so it was a lot harder to look up stuff and prove
That's true.
things.
Yeah, I feel like we do though. We live in like the so-called like information age, and you know, you can get any sort of information you want on the internet. The danger of that though is that you can get any sort of information you want on the internet, so like people are going to validate whatever stupid ideas they already have. They're going to find some website to find that. So if they believe that the gay agenda is about like sodomizing your sons, they're not going to find the original piece. They're going to find some place on the internet that agrees with whatever shit they're spewing.
Yeah, I always felt that like the main issue that people lacked was critical thinking, but it's gotten so much worse. Especially now with the way social media has integrated itself into everything. Like, you can't just say, well, you know, this is fringe, because then people go, well, look, it's got 2 million shares and 4,050 likes in the last hour. Like, it must be valid. Well, no, just because something's widespread doesn't mean it's valid. Like, there is a condition called mass cultural psychosis. Like, just because a lot of people do something does not make it right.
Right, exactly. So you just moved to Providence, but you got your start in Minneapolis and lived in New Orleans and Anchorage for a while. What was your experience like in the underground scenes in those cities?
Oh, okay. I will try to keep this brief because we're talking about like a solid decade here. Anchorage was cool, but you know, it's Anchorage, Alaska, so it's really far away from everything. At the time I lived there, which was about 2011 through 2013. Wait, was it? Yeah, 2011 through 2013. You know, there was a good little core of us artsy weirdos running around, but it's such a small place, you know. There's not a lot of touring acts that are going to come through ever. Very low selection of venues to choose from. So, you know, every gig and every show was, you know, the same 20 to 25 people. And we had a bunch of bands. We had a bunch of projects going, but, you know, it was a very small scene. Super inclusive. So, Minneapolis was great. That is honestly where I feel I finally started coming to myself as, like, an artist. Just because Minneapolis is so diverse. There was such a mass range of talent and art and projects going on in that town. I mean, my first weekend in Minneapolis, I think I went to 4 shows. So, yeah, Minneapolis, their underground scene was so good during the years that I lived there. And unfortunately, in about the 4 years that I've been gone from Minneapolis, they've lost most of their house venues, a handful of venues, and now, between social unrest and the pandemic, it's pretty bleak. But there's still good people doing good work in that town. So, New Orleans was really a low point in my life. New Orleans is very much a party town for outsiders. You know, the people that live there, we work and we drink at our neighborhood bars, but New Orleans is all about the party. And it's one of the few places I've been to in my life where I've seen shows start like 4 hours late. just because nobody's there. 4 people show up. They're like, oh, nobody's here yet. We're going to go to this party we just heard about. And I don't know. I had a bad time in New Orleans. I didn't like it. I was deeply unhappy for 3.5 years. I'd love to say the noise scene there, because it's just, New Orleans, the music culture there is so traditional, and it's so focused on, Dixieland jazz and brass bands. There's not really an infrastructure set up or any other kind of music to really get a foothold or thrive or flourish. And it's very insular. Like, if you're not from there or you haven't been there for like a decade, you are kind of viewed as a tourist. So, and now, I don't know, Providence, I'm stoked on Providence. I'm close to Philly and Richmond and DC and Boston and New York City, and I got homies all over the place, but pandemic. So we'll see. I have high hopes, but that depends on if we all come out the other side of this or not.
Right, that's true. When you've traveled or played fests, like, is there a place that you especially like to go, or a festival that you've really enjoyed playing?
Well, first and foremost, I have to give a shout out to all my homies in Hart in Fargo.
Yes.
Because Fargo has continuously been so good to me.
Fargo is fantastic. I'm always blown away by what's going on in Fargo.
Yeah, like Brandon Wald, who runs Black Ring Rituals and Invocation Films and Orbo 8-Tracks, he hit me up, I think, in 2015, maybe? Was just starting out, wanted me to come out from Minneapolis and play a gig. And I was blown away. Like, it was a decent-sized crowd. For what I was expecting from Fargo, I was impressed by the turnout. I hate to put it like this, but I made good money. I had a great time. Everybody was super nice. We had fun. Every time I've gone back to Fargo, it's been better and better and better. Like, the scene keeps growing. Everybody there is super stoked on what's happening. Everybody's producing stuff. They're all highly motivated, highly creative. Like, Fargo is a hidden gem. Maybe not so much hidden anymore. I think most of the noise scene's caught on the fact that Fargo's doing stuff. But, yeah, top of the list, Fargo. It will always have a soft spot in my heart. I love all those kids deeply, and I miss them. After that, Tulsa. Tulsa Arts Commission and Nathan Young and Matt X have been doing a great job with the Tulsa Noise Fest. That was an incredible 3 days. I think that was last year? It was in 2018. God, I don't know. This pandemic has ruined my understanding of time. That must have been last year, because there was going to be a Tulsa Noise Fest this year, and it's canceled, sort of. Tulsa was amazing. That was such a crazy good fest, and the sheer number of performers, plus, like, the caliber of performances there, just blew me away. God, where else? I had a great time in Ohio last year.
Was that in Dayton?
There was the Dayton Noise Symposium too, which was just like a solid 14 hours of punishment. That was a blast. And then the next day I woke up and I rode up to Cleveland with Alex, who runs Deathbed Tapes, and played what for me was a very personally important show at the Yellow House, which is now Rest in Peace, which is depressing. But when I first got into noise and was coming up, the Midwestern and especially the Ohio scene was what really got me into noise to start off with. So finally getting to go to Cleveland and play a show with Slit Throats and Skin Graft and Material Body Dysfunction, that was such a good gig. I will gladly go back to Ohio anytime.
Nice.
Which I know probably no one ever says, right?
Yeah, people usually depict Ohio as a pretty cursed place. I love Dayton. My mom grew up near Dayton, so I went there a lot when I was younger. I'm also kind of intimidated by the music scene there. I don't know why. Shout out Deathbed Tapes, though.
Yeah, Deathbed Tapes, Skeleton Dust, Mistake by the Lake up in Cleveland. Okay, I totally understand why people don't like Ohio and why it's not the greatest place ever. But if you're a noise musician, Ohio is super solid. Oh, and I think, Torn Lights down in Cincinnati. So, yeah, you've got 3 major heavy hitters in one state.
Yeah, you also got, Aaron Dillaway's based out of there.
That's right. I forgot. I didn't get to go to Hanson when I was there.
Yeah.
One day I'll still actually finally get to go to Aaron's shop. instead of just buying things from online.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I'm going to give it a clue here now. I don't want any more bullshit anytime during the day from anyone. That includes me. It's going to be very hot. It's going to be very uncomfortable for everybody. Want anybody yelling? We get anybody yelling around here anymore today, and then the shit is going to hit the fan. want any more bullshit anytime during the day. We get anybody yelling around here anymore today, and then the shit is going to hit the fan. I don't want any more bullshit anytime during the day. We get anybody yelling around here anymore today, and then the shit is going to hit the fan. I don't want any more bullshit anytime during the day. We get anybody yelling.
You just listened to an as of yet unreleased track off the upcoming split from Straight Panic and Spreaders.
Yeah, noise tends to attract a pretty unusual crowd. What are some of the most bizarre or like mind-blowing sets or things you've seen at shows?
I mean, let's see. Now I feel like I have to dig back through my reserves and think about what stands out at the top of the list. I feel like I've seen a lot of weird stuff, like Fat Man and Little Boy playing at Midwest Harsh Fest 4 in Detroit. A lot of public nudity. At one point, someone was swinging a folding table around in a circle, and they just like let it go into the audience. That was pretty cool. I enjoyed that. I did get hit by the table. Cocky SP. I've loved all of their shows. I've bled at many of their performances. I saw Machismo play at a Minneapolis Noise Fest. I think that was in like 2014 maybe. And they had bottle service. That was really that was something I don't think I've ever seen again at another show. And plus, I got to see Machismo. That was sweet. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I've become desensitized. Like the mass amounts of public nudity and fireworks and power tools and explosives. I will say I've always been a little disappointed that I never got to see Eugenics Council back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this. I don't know if Rosemary would be happy with me telling this story, but there's that. Everybody knows the Eugenics Council. One of their instruments for live shows included like homemade pipe bombs, and I got to be friends with Rosemary when we were both living in New Orleans for a short period together. And I asked her, I was like, listen, I've always heard this urban legend that at one of your shows, one of the instruments was a loaded handgun. Is that true or not? And she's like, I'm not going to answer that question. So in no way am I implying that is true, but I also can't say that it's not. So the jury is still out on that one.
That's fantastic. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking to see weird stuff at a show, noise is definitely where it's at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You frequently collaborate and make splits with other artists in the noise underground, like Nuka Daruma, Carry On Eater, Contractor, Mono Wolf, Dos Letalis, all artists I frequently play on the show. Why put so much of your creative energy towards splits and collaboration?
I lack impulse control. I mean, I love my friends. I love the work my friends are doing. And I love supporting my friends. And I keep telling myself year after year after year, no, this year you're going to learn how to say no. You're going to pull it back a little. You're not going to work so much and put out so much stuff. And then somebody hits me up and like, hey, do you want to do a split? So-and-so said they'd release it. And I just say yes. I say yes every time because I'm stoked. I'm stoked to be included. I'm stoked to work with my friends. Like, I can't help it. I don't know. The noise scene is so inclusive and so close-knit that, like, just working with other people is fun.
Yeah. Do you think there's, like, a general proclivity amongst noise musicians to collaborate and do splits?
I think there really is, and a lot of that, in a general sense, is because, noise is not formulaic on a basic level. Like, it's not, rock music, where there's, like, intro, verse, chorus, bridge, verse. Like, you can have a 10-second long track, you can have an hour-long track. Like, it's really easy to do splits because you can put out as much material as you want on a subject or not, just put out a split together. It's just a lot easier to work with because you're not tied into the traditional notion of, like, well, what is a song? Mm-hmm. And plus, I think just because the noise scene is, comparatively to other stuff, it is relatively smaller and more close-knit. Like, yeah, just split culture for us, it's a way of staying involved and staying active. And also splits generally don't tend to require, like, the same amount of in-depth work. And I don't mean to say that people aren't putting work into their stuff, but, the amount of effort and time that I have to put into a full length that's on a cohesive topic, a split is much less. It's much less brain energy for me.
What are some of your favorite artists that you've worked with?
Oh, man. Well, I will say that the collab that I did with Theta out of Norway, that I'm really, really proud of that. I'm still kind of blown away by how well that turned out. But that was right at the start of the shutdown and the quarantine and everything. I wasn't working like 14 to 16 hours a day at a bar anymore. So suddenly I found myself with lots and lots and lots of free time. And the floodgates just kind of opened. And I was working on stuff like all day, every day for like 3 weeks. That was good. I really love that. Geez, let's see. This is how I know my catalog is too big, because now I'm actually like looking at my backlog of physical copies. The Splinter Belly tape, which just came out this year, which is a collab between Matt Hex and myself. That we really kind of killed that. That was good. I'm super proud of that one. Of course, you mentioned Niku Dharma, our split. That turned out really interestingly because we didn't discuss it at all, but we both basically came at the same concept from different angles. That was, I don't know, I guess that's probably because we're both familiar with each other's work, but that was interesting. Like, we both basically did the same piece, at least not formulaically, how do I put it? It was basically like the sounds of someone being restrained and tortured.
Nice.
Like, contact mics tied to chairs. It was weird. We both came at the exact same idea without discussing it, but that's a cool split. That's one I'm happy of. Yeah, I don't know. I'm happy with all the work I've put out, for the most part. I mean, there's stuff I think any artist would agree. You go back and you listen to it and you're like, God, why did I make this track? I hate this now. But then on the same grounds, like, I've had people come and tell me that, like, tracks that I absolutely hate and wish I hadn't made, they're like, oh, it's my favorite one on that tape. Well, okay, I guess it's not that bad. Jeez. Oh, yeah, the collab tape I did with Climax Denial, that was super cool because I have really loved Alex's work for a long time. So getting to do that was kind of a personal achievement for me. Jeez, wow, I've put out way too much music, haven't I? Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, to say this, and I mean this genuinely, there's no split or collaborative work that I've put out that I do not look back on fondly.
Speaking of your collaborative work with Theta, earlier this year you released an album with them about the coronavirus, Pandemic by Isolation, which came out via Deathbed Tapes. How has the coronavirus affected your ability to get by and be creative?
Well, like I said, I'm not working like 60 to 70 hours a week anymore. So I have the time to work on stuff, which is nice. I will say it's kind of killed my drive a little bit. And that's not to say that, like, I'm not motivated to work on stuff. But back in New Orleans, you know, when you've got maybe a 2 to 4 hour window once a week to work on stuff, that really gets the gears moving about, like, okay, I gotta sit down, set up my gear, do a sound check, start work. Like, now I kind of find myself falling into the trap of, like, well, I need to work on this, but, you know, I got all day, and all day tomorrow, and the next day. But it's been good. Like, anyone who's familiar with my work knows that I'm super prolific, and sometimes I'm not super okay with that because I worry about the quality of work that I'm producing. But for me personally, on an artistic level, the pandemic's been good because I actually have time to just, like, work on my work. I'm not so concerned with being a wage slave. That's going to change pretty rapidly. But it's been a fun little vacation for me.
Yeah.
Anxiety-ridden, but enjoyable.
In what ways do you think noise is an apt way to deliver your feelings about the pandemic?
Well, first off, you know, we've touched on this here and there. Textures, anxiety, like, noise is generally not what most people would call attractive music. So I definitely think it gives us all kind of an easier in to deal with the uncertainty and the anxieties of living right now. Like, jobs, there's no money, there's this invisible virus going around that half the country doesn't seem to be taking seriously. So it's a good way for people to like channel their anxieties. But also, I mean, you know, I feel pretty secure in making this statement. Most noise people, I would say, record themselves at home. Mm-hmm. Like most of us aren't going to studios. We don't have studio techs. We don't have session musicians, you know. So for us, like, yes, we've lost shows and we've lost touring opportunities, but at least as far as our creative output, I don't really think it's hampered too many of us. Because we don't have to be like, oh no, the studio is closed. I can't go to the studio now.
Right.
But, I mean, you know, then there's the whole psychic and emotional toll of all this. Like, people miss people. We need money. We can't go outside and do anything. Like, this is all very emotionally taxing.
Yeah. Speaking of people, missing people, I find that interesting. You seem to be a very empathetic person, a very caring person. But in an interview with Issues Magazine, you claim that you possess a dislike for people. Do you still hold this view?
I mean, in a basic sense, I do. I think you could make the argument that I'm an introvert. Like, I like the people I click with, and I love my friends a lot, but I hate crowds. Mm-hmm. I really don't do well in crowds. I have anxiety. And also that interview I did when I was, again, working at a bar in New Orleans. So you can imagine why my feelings towards people were probably much lessened at that point. But yeah, it's, when I say I dislike people, I mean that in a very on-the-face kind of statement. Like, I don't like being in crowds. I really don't. I don't do crowds well. I don't do large numbers of people well. I find it anxiety-inducing. Like, I'm much happier with a close-knit circle of friends. But now, having said that, like, you know, yeah, noise fests are great. But again, that's a controlled environment, you know. You don't get a lot of people that wander into a noise fest that don't know what's going on. So
that'd be an entertaining thing to see.
There was some of it at Tulsa. It was fun. Because the spot the fest was at was pretty much, like, right downtown. And, of course, you know, it's a building in the middle of a fenced-off parking lot. So parking lot's just full of people. You can hear noise and music coming out of the building. So people walking around would, like, wander over and poke their heads in. Oh, man, there were some great facial reactions from people who didn't mean to be there.
Nice. How do you think your dislike for people or dislike for crowds, how does it manifest in your music?
You know, that's an interesting question because I don't think I've ever really thought about that. But I do know a few things that I tend to fall back on and use repeatedly are very thick wall-like textures and very, very high frequency ranges. So I guess in kind of a picturesque way, you could imagine a very tall wall with sirens on top of it pointing outwards. But I don't know. I mean, you know, noise music isn't for everybody, and it attracts the people that get it. It's, granted, this is just my life, but I haven't met a lot of people who have gotten introduced to noise cold turkey and were like, oh, this is really cool. Usually people I've met that get introduced to it without any kind of context, you're just like, oh my god, this is terrible, what is it, turn it off.
Yeah,
I don't know, that's one I'll probably have to mull on more and think about and examine artistically.
Is your dislike for people, for crowds, is it counterbalanced by like a love for certain aspects of humanity, or have you gone full nihilist?
No, I don't think I'll ever go full nihilist. I don't know, you know, just like what is that from? I know, I've used that sample too. Crap. Oh, it's from Men in Black. That's what it was. A person is intelligent, but people are dumb, panicky animals. It's paraphrase, of course, but it's kind of true, you know? And I saw this working at bars. There'll be somebody I know on a personal basis, and they're fine, they're level-headed, they're a rational person. But you put them in a crowd of 80 people, and the crowd starts wiling out, and all of a sudden, you see people that you definitely know better, behaving badly. I don't know. There's something about that innate physiological herd mentality that we all still have in the back of our lizard brain. It just, you put far too many people together, and there's too much of a chance for it to just get stupid.
Yeah, I understand. Do you think there's potential for humanity?
Well, I've been rewatching Star Trek The Next Generation, so I really want to say yes.
Nice.
The unfortunate aspect of that is everybody says they want the Star Trek future, but they all forget about the Third World War. And I'm really having some anxiety that we're living through that pre-era. Like, I don't want to live through the atomic war, but I mean, yeah, I think at base level, most people are pretty decent. I think even not quite the absolutely terrible people, like the rapists and the serial killers, but, you know, I think even people like my parents' generation who have become Trumpers, like, they're not necessarily evil people, but they've been misled through disinformation, and their own socioeconomic anxieties have been weaponized against them. I wholeheartedly, genuinely do want to believe that deep down people can get it together, but I'm also pretty cynical about that, so...
I feel that. I
don't know, maybe I just want people to be better. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah. What should we look forward to seeing from Thomas Botner in the future?
Blamage Books out of California is working on publishing a book of mine that's coming out. Split with Fistfuck. That's the band name. I'm not just swearing for fun. Split with Spreaders. Split with Made Flesh. Supposedly, I've got a split with Spring Break that's coming out on Angst, but it was going to drop right before the pandemic hit Italy really hard. So, last I heard, the tapes are all done and everything's done. They just haven't left the country. I don't know. I think that's still going to happen eventually. Split with Comgutter, split with Frataxin. Oh, my final family planning tape is coming out. That was a side project I had for a few years. This final tape has been like coming out for like almost 3 years now, I think. It's been on like 3 different labels, but now it's finally actually happening. Thank you, Austin, out of Fargo, again. Yeah, I've got some splits and some collabs, and I've got a full length coming out on Flag Day this year that I'm really excited about. I'm chomping at the bit because they told me I had till like September or something to send them the recordings. And of course, me being me, I sent them the final project like almost a year in advance, because that's just the kind of person I am. So I've been chomping at the bit for that to finally come out. That'll come out this year. Yeah, Damien Records is doing a Secret Historian 7-inch lathe cut.
Nice.
Oh, my first 4 Straight Panic tapes, not counting the very first one, which was a self-titled. The 4 that I actually consider albums, those are coming out remastered on Oxidation later this year.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff.
Nice.
There's a bunch of stuff that's like on my coming soon list. So, you know, there's no shortage of work that I've got that's ready to be crapped out into the world.
You're a very productive person. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I was more than happy to.
Thomas Botner of Straight Panic, Fire Island AK, and Secret Historian. Thank you for coming on.
Suppressive police states have been set up throughout the Western world. The precise programming of thought, feeling, and apparent sensory impressions enables the police states to maintain a democratic facade from behind which they loudly denounce as criminals, perverts, and drug addicts anyone who opposes the control machine. We intend to march on the police machine everywhere. We intend to destroy the police machine and all its records. We intend to destroy all dogmatic verbal systems. The family unit and its cancerous expansion into tribes, countries, nations, we will eradicate at its vegetable roots. We don't want to hear any more family talk, mother talk, father talk, cop talk, priest talk, country talk, or party talk. To put it country simple, we have heard enough bullshit. Our aim is total chaos.
You just listened to the track The Wild Boys off the album Anthrop Obscenity, which came out via Deathbed Tapes earlier this year. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special edition of Against the Vile Grain, featuring the music of Thomas Botner. Have a great night.